thank you to everybody for being here. Thanks a lot to the people who've contributed in the chat, in the Q&A box. Please, by all means, feel free to use either the question and answer box or the chat to ask more questions. Also, feel free to use the raise hand button. I just wanted to remind you that, especially when it comes to those reflective questions, there's no right or wrong answer, right? So I'm not here to quiz anybody, you know, and people may have different views, you know, on what literacy might be. We'll start with the first question then, if that's okay. And by all means, I'm used to teaching loud classes with very rowdy students, so I don't mind if people want to interrupt, or that's okay, that's okay. First question was for you, what is literacy? So I hope you had a bit of time to think about this. And again, we can look at it from different angles, I think, and hopefully you guys can tell me if you agree or disagree, or if you're not sure. I think for me, teaching literacy, my first port of call always is teaching literacy is facilitating access. So when I talk about access, it's access to daily life. So what do my students need to be able to read to function on a daily basis, and what do they need to be able to write, again, to function in an autonomous way on a daily basis? So always think about facilitating access. That's maybe quite a narrow definition of literacy, you might think, and you know, more and more we talk about multi-literacy, and depending on who you get to teach, you know, we've been talking more and more about visual literacy, so being able to decode images, and that's something that we do a lot, maybe with younger students using picture books. We look at visual literacy, we bring in, you know, picture books from different parts of the world to look at, you know, how do other parts of the world look like? And that's something we can do with adult learners as well, you know, using the internet, the classroom, showing them different pictures of different places. So this is the town hall in Belfast, is what it looks like. Is there a town hall where you're from? What does it look like? Let's find out. So we can also talk about visual literacy, and we can talk as well about cultural literacy. And there's a phrase that I love, and I don't know if this phrase translates in any other language. It doesn't translate into French. And tell me if it exists in any of your languages. But here often we hear the expression, oh, you need to be able to read the room. And I love this, read the room. What do you mean, read the room? And I think what we mean by read the room is be able to understand what's going on between people, being able to decode all those cultural things that are happening in one place at one time. And again, you know, we can't take for granted that we all read the room in the same way, right? So I think we also have a lot to do with cultural literacy, depending on where we teach and who we teach. But I would say I would always be mindful of making assumptions. Oh, everybody knows this. We all know things, but maybe sometimes in slightly different ways. So yeah, so feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree with this. Just to summarize this first question, literacy is access to daily life in terms of what we need to read and what we need to be able to write. But we can also extend this definition to visual literacy, cultural literacy. We could even talk about ecological literacy. If you look at, you know, loads of TEFL websites have started, you know, producing environmental resources for students. Because again, they want to develop the idea of environmental or ecological literacy. Thank you for that, Bilal. Not just called, but individual. Absolutely, absolutely, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, and again, I think it's to do with, you know, we're not just teaching language. We're not just teaching the alphabet and the letters, you know, how to read and write. We're also teaching about, you know, how people kind of function, you know. So again, helping students with their people skills in some ways. And I'm sure, you know, if you've taught in the general English classroom, we've all done, you know, oh, let's have a job interview role play. And again, it's about helping people, you know, develop their interaction skills, their classroom interaction and their, real life interaction skills. Thanks for that, Bilal. Absolutely, yeah. Social skills, people skills, absolutely. Thanks for that, Hedwig, as well. And that's one thing I found out, even teaching advanced students, students who had amazing lexis, flawless grammar, but who just did not really know how to interact with other people who came maybe from different cultural backgrounds, and just didn't have that know-how. They didn't know how to read the room, basically. Question 2, if we're ready to move on to question 2. Yeah, just checking the question and answers. Feel free to, even if they're not questions, feel free to share your comments as well. Absolutely. If we're ready to move on to number 2, well then I would like to ask you who your literacy learners are. I think I've told you, I've told you about mine. They can be anybody, which is amazing. I think, because it keeps the job so much more stimulating. It really, really, really does. And again, I was a literacy learner myself whenever I went to study Arabic. And that's when I realized that, a bit of empathy goes a long way. So I think be able to put yourself in the literacy learner's shoes is always a good thing to be able to do. Just to, it just takes that bit of time, and a bit of encouragement and praise is really, really helpful.
So,
Yes, Gabby?
I have a question really, because when I was watching the video, what kind of hit me was the fact that a student who has literacy needs doesn't necessarily have to be a beginner, right? So we could have a student who has literacy needs, but they can be at, say, an upper intermediate level. So what I thought was how, because this is really tricky, because it's easier with beginners, right? It's easier
Yeah,
to integrate a student like that into a beginner level class. But how do you integrate an upper intermediate level student who has literacy needs into a general English class?
that's a
Um,
really good
I mean,
question, Gabby.
is
And
that is that your experience? I mean, have you ever? Yeah.
yeah, upper intermediate up to advanced.
Mm.
Yeah, and really up to pre-sessional courses for university. Really.
So how
Um,
do what do we do? How can we help?
Well, I think again, you need to have that conversation with the students as well, because they need to be made aware that, if they're being placed in upper intermediate class, it's usually based on their speaking,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Or their listening.
Yes.
But I think they need to be made aware that actually they're quite hard to place. You said, look, your speaking and your listening are up there, but in terms of your reading and writing,
Yeah.
you're still so we're happy to place you in that higher level class,
Yeah.
but so you're going to have an awful lot of work to do to be able to catch up. Now what I find is in a classroom, anything that's to do with listening, speaking, vocab and grammar, usually that's not an issue. What I've had to do when it comes to reading and writing, I haven't used different texts reading for reading and writing, but I've had to differentiate
Mm-hmm.
tasks. Definitely I've had to grade the tasks differently. And again, I had that conversation with the students beforehand. I had said, I had asked them, how do you feel if we're doing a reading? You get the same text, but you'll have very different questions. Your questions will have to be way more simple. How do you feel about that? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? To be honest, it's never been an issue. I think I've just been really lucky because all of the students really knew that they badly needed to improve. So they were ready to do anything. And bit by bit, I was able to say, look, I think you're ready to tackle slightly more challenging texts or challenging tasks. But also it was a matter of saying to them, look, here are a couple of websites. This is what every day you need to do. It's not on me to go and check on you. You're a fully grown adult, but you're going to have to do extra homework. And I would probably sit with them once a week, just at the end of the week, to check. So, have you found that extra homework?
Mm-hmm.
What about the audiobooks we talked about?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
the motivation element that you mentioned earlier, right? That
oh,
students
absolutely.
are highly motivated,
Yeah,
and that's why it's so rewarding.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, yes, because I mean, my experience is I had a student who had literacy needs. I mean, he couldn't read, couldn't write, but it was a beginner level. So it's kind of easier. You can still use the course book with a little bit of extra help and this extra homework.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that was a beginner level. And then I thought, how do you deal with a problem like this when at a higher level, when intermediate, upper intermediate?
I think ultimately, if they can, they need a bit of, if it's possible to organize, they need a bit of one-to-one help. I
Mm.
really do. I think a tiny bit of one-to-one goes a long, long way. I really think so. Because it's great to be in the group where people can learn from one another. It's amazing. But I think it's, if it's holding them back, say, look, we'll try to see if we can give you a couple of extra hours one-to-one,
Mm.
just to give you the head start. And then see,
Yeah.
but again, I think, Abby, as you said, the motivation is there. And usually when you teach beginner levels, people make progress quite quickly,
Yes.
and it's one thing that I found with literacy is like, the will is there, the sense of purpose is there, and progress is usually quite fast. I'm just having a look there at other comments. Thanks for that, Christiana. So you're teaching very young learners from 4 to 7. And I think that's the ideal case scenario, really. I find that, the younger the kids are, the more they can be placed in a kind of mainstream classroom where all the kids are learning at the same time. That's one thing I see here in Belfast whenever I go around different schools. When the kids arrive in nursery or in the first few years of primary school, oh my goodness, it's so much easier because all kids are going through their phonics. All kids are going through, again, that idea of, people skills, which you mentioned early on, Bilal, turn taking, sharing, feeling empathy. All the kids are going through that at the same time. Early teenagers, I think, is when it starts to become a bit more difficult because then they might feel like, well, I'm in the same class as somebody who's much better, and my literacy is not good. I can't read very well. One thing I've noticed about students who have reading difficulties, and I'm not sure how it works, but a lot of them are thinking that if they can't read well, it means that they can't think well. And one thing that I found that really helps, and that's one resource I wanted to share with you today, is the idea of using silent books. Because silent books, I think a lot of them are written for children, but really they're used all over the world with loads of different communities and with adults. And it's the idea of using a story through pictures and creating the story together. And what I think is amazing about silent books is that as a reader, you become the author. There's no right or wrong. The words aren't there. So you interpret the picture whatever way you see fit. And I think it's very empowering especially for teenagers. I find that teenagers do brilliant project work with silent books. So
Sophie, but how do you teach literacy? Because obviously, kind of construing a story is, again, that speaking, right? How do we get down to this sentence level and writing?
well, we're going to start at word level. So I think when I start with a silent book, it could just be a matter of labeling the picture. So
Oh,
let's say 5 things we can see in this picture. So we can even start with, at word level. And one thing I like to do whenever I teach class, one thing I think you mentioned, Gabby, sometimes you teach literacy learners in general English classes. So you're teaching people who've got a lot of difficulties reading and writing in using our script, using our alphabet, with students who use the Roman alphabet. So again, I think sometimes, it can feel like a bit of a discrepancy, a bit of a gap. One thing that I find great is whenever we use silent books, we always write the words in all the different scripts that we've got in the class. So I think it's very humbling whenever you come from the Roman alphabet. Let's say if you come from Poland, you speak a different language, but use the same script.
yeah,
And
yeah.
when you see the same word written in Arabic or in Chinese, you're like, wow, oh my God.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful idea. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, to do it in different languages.
Yeah, well, I think there's something for everybody, but I think it's also one way of it's equality of access. It's to say, look, yes, sometimes we'll have to spend a bit. I'm going to have to spend a bit of time helping those guys with their letters and writing words, but we also need to be aware of where they're coming from. We can't do that. using their script. We can't write that word in Chinese. We certainly can't write that word in Arabic. So I think it's for everybody to be a bit more aware as to who's in the room and how we're going to work together best. And I hope that's not deviating too much, but whenever we're talking about teaching mixed levels, I was thinking about this because that's how I started teaching literacy. I just had those students brought into my general English class. And you know, I'd received no training in terms of how to teach literacy or how to teach mixed levels. And I could find there was frustration from both sides. From, you know, I had European students and I had students from South America. So a lot of Spanish speakers from different parts of the world. But there was a lot of frustration because I think felt they were being held back. And there was frustration from the students who came. I think some of them were Chinese and some of them used the Arabic script. There was a bit of frustration because it didn't feel like, you know, the other guys were really welcoming them. So anyway, there was some misunderstanding, and I just thought the best thing I could do was just to have a conversation with them and to be really transparent and say, look, I'd really like this to work. I would really, really like it. And I know it can work, but I think we all need to be aware of how we're going to make it work. So I'd be very clear with them and say, look, you guys, you know, you find reading and writing difficult, but your speaking, your pronunciation is actually pretty good, really pretty good. You guys, your reading and your writing is immaculate, but your speaking, your pronunciation, you know, you're struggling. So hopefully, if you guys work together, you've got very complementary strength. Please help each other. I'll give you time to work in your own groups, so you feel like you're working at your own speed. And I'll give you activities where you have to work together in mixed groups where you feel you can actually help each other and learn from one another.
That's promoting, that's peer teaching, yeah. But you know,
Yeah.
back to the silent books, because now when I think about it, it's just a beautiful idea to generate the teaching and learning content. That's what it is, right? Because by kind of labeling individual things in the pictures, this is how students generate, right, this material, and then that's how you help them learn how to write it and how to read it.
Yeah. Oh,
How is
absolutely.
this different? Sorry, how is this different to this? There's this methodology called, I can't remember, language experience.
Well,
How
it
is this?
is. You know, sorry, Gabby. I think there is some overlap, and I think the idea is if you've got some labeling done, so at least students know those keywords, then you can start to put them into sentences that they create. And when you start to write them down, then you can pretty much cut them up, which is much if you've got much smaller classes, obviously. But once you've cut up, you know, the words, then they have to work on syntax to recreate the sentence.
I wonder if you could, sorry, just for the benefit of the audience, do you think you could just very quickly summarize the main principles of this methodology?
Yes, of course. Yeah,
Sorry,
I'll try.
I left out now.
So I think the idea of the language experience, and I think there are some really nice clips on YouTube actually, is that you start from a short sentence that is meaningful and personalized to the learner. So it could be, even if you're not using a silent book, it could be, you know, back home, we eat a lot of fish. Like, if you're talking about food, once you help the student create that sentence. So they could say, my country, a lot of fish. You say, okay, so back home, we eat a lot of fish.
So you
And
paraphrase it in a
you
sense.
paraphrase it and then you write it down for them. Once you've done this, you can cut up the words and you ask the students to rearrange the words in the correct order. I don't know about you, I'm a big fan of color coding when it comes to syntax. I like to have a color for my subject, a different color for the verb, another one for the object. But that kind of, you know, especially if you use the same colors all the time. Once the student has recreated the sentence where they have put the words in the correct order, then you just get them to copy the sentence. And then it could be a matter of getting to change a word. So, you know, back home we eat a lot of, you know, or back home we don't eat a lot of, you know. So it's really but what I really like about it is that the sentence comes from the learner. So hopefully it, you know, it sticks better, it becomes more memorable. So
Mhm.
that's the language experience as I understand it. It's one thing that I've used teaching a lot of one-to-one. With a class of 12, it's, you know, it's tricky, and we might do it as a kind of collaborative writing.
Mhm. So
No,
essentially, you don't even need materials when you
no,
teach literacy.
no.
So this again, student-generated material,
Yeah,
um, and that's. But can you teach phonics as well? Like,
that's a really lovely question, Gabby, and I think it's something that Maria, was asking about in the question and answer box. That's brilliant.
oh my
Um,
God, there are so many questions.
I
So please,
know, and this connects to do different things. So I think some people said, where do you start teaching literacy? It's not like you've got beginner unit one. I think the first place you start from is you start with the learner. You need to find out what they need to do, and you need to prioritize those needs. So, well, yeah, they'd like to be able to chat to native speakers, yes, but maybe the first thing they need to do is register with the local doctors, the local GP. In which case, that's you download the form and you help them fill it in, and then you go through these keywords, on the form, which then they will find when they try to register their children in the local primary school,
mhm,
for them to see actually, those words, they keep coming back. Um, so I found that you always start teaching literacy from your students' needs, prioritize them. You can use resources of the internet. I find that authentic materials actually really lend themselves well to teaching literacy.
mhm,
Um, and it's not about, again, here's Dickens, read. But,
mhm,
especially if they live in an English speaking country, then they need to be able to decode that bus schedule, and notes from the school,
mhm.
especially at the moment when the schools have to communicate so much because the schools are closed, etc. So I think authentic materials can actually work. In terms of phonics,
Yeah, I
yes,
was about to ask you to, yeah, to,
yeah.
because Maria
Um,
is waiting for her answer.
Sorry, Maria. Yes, 100%. Now you're gonna find that people will say, "Oh, English! Oh my God, this English spelling, it's so irregular, it's crazy." Well, it's very complex, but the thing is, technically, it is regular. Bear with me, because it's based on different systems. So you've got the etymological system, so words that come from Latin or from Greek or from Arabic. You've got the lexical system, so the idea of there, and there. For there, over there, the possessive adjective, and there, the contraction of they are, where meaning dictates the spelling. Morphological system, so the prefixes, the suffixes, but also the phonological system, and this is when phonics really comes in. So some words can be spelled phonetically, and I've got an example here.
Mm,
Right. But as Maria was asking about using the phonemic script, yes, I'm a big fan of it. I don't use it for the sake of using it, but I use it first as a correction tool. So let's say if I hear that the Titanic was a beautiful sheep, I might just, write and no, it's a short it's a ship, right?
mm,
I don't teach it in one go. I don't have one lesson said today we're learning the script, but I include it bit by bit. And one activity that I really like to do is one sound per day. So we call it, the sound of the day. So for example, one day we might look at the ah sound, and we might look around the room, we might go out on a short walk, make a list of, let's say, 10 different things that we see, and then see, can we hear the ah sound in any of these words? And how do we write the ah sound? So that technique will help your student with the sound and the letter correspondence. Now, the ah sound in English is usually spelled with the letter A. So that one's pretty easy. But whenever it comes to our trickier ones, even the short I sound, well, usually it's the letter I. But if you think about women, what letter do you use for the I sound? It's the letter O, right? So that's a more unusual spelling of the sound I. Or you could say, I can't help you, I'm busy. The I sound is the letter U.
mm,
So if we start from this sound and we look, okay, how do we write that sound? It means that we can look at the traditional spellings, the common spellings of that sound, and also the more unusual spellings. Then I would get the students to write all the words with that I sound on a card. We put them in the Polly Pocket. And on the Friday, I'll take all the cards out and we'll go through those words again. So, okay, so we had the word busy with the
mm.
letter U. What sound is this? see if students can recognize that it's the same sound as in fish. It's a I sound. So one sound per day, 4 days a week, and Friday is review.
I wonder if Maria would like to tell us about her experience, because it really sounds, from her question, it sounds like she has a lot of experience.
That'd be brilliant.
Maria?
Maria, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you very much for being here with you. I'm really enjoying this session very much. Interesting, because when you mentioned that you use the phonemic system, yes, and also I use phonics as well with my students, adult students. And mainly, the main problem, which I didn't write down, it's always with the consonants, with the sound of the consonants. With Arab students, with Chinese sometimes, and then with Indian, lately with an Indian student. So I have problems with the consonants. And I was wondering if any of you has had similar experiences. Since since Sophie mentioned that she was learning Arabic, I wonder whether she had been close to an Arab culture. She was teaching in an Arabian country, as I was. So,
do you know what? For me, that's been the most humbling thing trying to learn Arabic, because I thought, do you know what? I think I'm okay at learning languages. Well, I think that's a really interesting point, Maria, that you said, a lot of your students would struggle with consonant sounds. I think, again, it really depends on where your students, are from. I find that a lot of students could also struggle with vowels, because when you think about vowels, you've got the letter A, E, I, O, U. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 20 vowel sounds. So vowels can also be a bit difficult. One thing that I remember using with a lot of our Arabic students was, the P and the B can be a bit difficult.
Yes, indeed.
Right? And I don't think the P sound really exists in Arabic.
That's right. It doesn't exist at all. That sound doesn't exist.
I used to, again, I can, if any of you would like me to upload this later on, I mean, we're just looking, even with adult learners, I was doing worksheets. So let's say we've got a bank of words at the top. So we've got big, bear, bark, park, people, police, and basically they have to match the word with the correct shape. The reason for this, I think it's really clever, because at first I was like, what's the point? Do you know, see, if you're not sure about how to spell a word, do you find that you have to write it 2 or 3 times? And then you just know which one looks right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Why? I think a lot of us do this. So I don't know if anybody wants to share. Why do you think we do this?
Interesting.
Well, from what I understand, it's that we learn spelling with our photographic memory. So somehow we remember the shape of a word, we remember how long or how short it is, we remember if some of the letters go up or if some of the letters go down. And we tend to remember, I think, if you know how many letters there are in a word, it kind of means really if it looks too short, if it looks too long. So basically with the P and the B, we would use these, because then in terms of correction, let's say if a student said Bible instead of people, I could just say, no, going down. And they would know that I meant it's the P sound, right? One thing that we did after that, any excuse to bring a bit of color into the classroom, but to supplement the word shape, then we would use the Cuisenaire rods. I think they were, mostly made for teaching math. And I don't have any idea how you use that for math, but I would use this for word shapes, where if you they're like little wooden blocks or plastic blocks, and then we would give them some of those to the students, and they would have to recreate some of the words and then quiz each other. So let's say bark versus park, big versus pig, people, police, apple, all these words. So then the students really get to think, hold on, what's the shape of that word? And see if they can even quiz themselves, how much can they remember? And then how much can they quiz each other? So word shapes I find are quite useful for consonant sounds. Maria, I hope that Is that okay?
Yes, yes, okay. It's interesting because I mean, it just came to my mind now that with German students, we also had that problem with the W, and that they would just, I just have to recall some examples, and it's something to do with the sound of the letter in their own language and trying to transcribe it to the English word, and for whatever reason, I think they make this common mistake, you know.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Maria. I think a lot of the time it's to do with pronunciation.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I think, you know, teaching literacy, teaching people how to write. I mean, they need to know how to say the words, okay, so,
yes.
as well. So it's really integrated. We need to teach pronunciation. We need to teach speaking. We need to teach everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
interesting with that. I have an Indian student now, and she's just using the W sound. And sometimes I don't understand what she's trying to tell me. And she's using this W sound. And I wonder whether she's confusing it with the sound U. I mean, I've just got to write the words now because it got to the point that I'm just getting really, really mesmerized about that.
I think it's quite a common pronunciation pattern.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. But again, I think it's useful for, let's say, maybe some of the other nationalities in the room to say, well, you know, isn't that interesting that, you know, a lot of people, when they speak English and they're from India, they tend to, you know, pronounce that sound. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, it's really interesting to observe all that. But that's why I wanted to ask you, you know, if you had been familiar with the Arab culture. So sometimes, because those were the ones I had first. Then I had this Chinese as well. With Chinese, it's another matter anyway. But very interesting. And then again, I mean, we just progress eventually. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Maria. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That's great. So I'd say, yeah, definitely keep using the phonemic script, the phonemic system. Yeah, and I don't know how your students feel about it, but I know that anytime I start using phoneme, there's always that reaction in the room. What? You know, what is this? But so you know, guys, remember, just the first rule of learning a language is don't panic. Right? So if you see something that you're not familiar with, don't panic. If you hear something you're not sure about, don't panic. We can talk about it. But it's, I think, when students see the aim of that tool, go, actually, do you know what? It is useful. Because I think, especially when you're learning English, and no matter what level, if you see a word for the first time, you can never be 100% sure of how to pronounce it. So phonemes are huge. I mean, they're so helpful. And I find that when students kind of stick with it and keep using them, they'll say, you know what, it's really helped with my pronunciation, it's helped with connected speech, it's helped with stress.
Yeah, and obviously this is fun in the classroom as well.
Oh, yes.
It's about, you
so
know,
much fun.
Yes. So you train your students to actually like it and to see the fun side to teaching phonics. So yeah. Now there's another question from Maria as well, but that will take us back to grading your language and simply language.
Yes.
I really would like you to say a little bit more about it, because now we have this problem of what kind of language do we use when we teach beginners, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And Maria said, do we use formal language? Because most certainly we don't use the colloquial language, right? So tell us more.
I think it's a really interesting area to talk about, Gabby and Maria and everybody, because I think it's a very cultural aspect of language. One thing I found is, I think certainly here in Ireland, and I think in Britain as well, I think in English-speaking professional environments, I think language tends to be a bit more informal. That's my, I know that, you know, let's say if I went back to France, I would need to use a slightly higher, a slightly more formal level of language in the workplace, for sure. For a start, I would have to use the polite form of you, which we don't have here in English. But one thing I would say is, I don't think we should confuse informal language with slang or being rude. You know, I do think I tend not to use colloquial language in the classroom, right? Because I think, especially with the beginners, I think they've got enough on their plate. You know, I really do. And I think bit by bit, they will pick up all that colloquial language. And it's maybe something we can focus on as an interesting lesson, maybe at some point when their level goes up a bit.
But in terms of, in particular, native speaker teachers who really find it it's not easy to grade your language when it's your mother tongue. It really is not. It's easier for us non-native speakers.
Absolutely.
But, for native speakers, this really is painful, having to grade the language. You have to be very, very careful. So I wonder what advice you would give to, say, new teachers who have to teach beginner level or elementary level students, and they simply don't know what is appropriate, how to grade language so they don't sound patronizing.
Yeah, well, I've got different ideas. Some of them people might like, some of them I know for a fact people are not big fans of, but hear me out. I think especially if you're a native speaker, I feel for you, because as you said, Gabby, I think it's harder. I do think it's harder. Now, we have to accept that students may not need to understand 100% of what the teacher says. So there might be the odd word they don't understand, and that's okay. As long as instructions, I mean, I don't think we can compromise with instructions. Instructions, I do think, need to be nearly scripted. And I know it may seem awfully prescriptive and not natural. I think as a new teacher, it's not something you'll have to do for a long time. I really don't. But I think to get yourself started, it would not be a bad thing to start scripting at least the key words for your instructions. And if one word is not necessary, out it goes. So there's no say, so now what I'd really like you to do. No. Say, now, look at the text. So I think if you can script just before the lesson at the planning stage, then you can try to think, actually, that's not necessary, that can go, to try to simplify, make sure that your instructions are clear and concise. Another tip, and I think that applies to us all as teachers, and we all hate it, I hate it as well, but it's so useful. Nobody can give you feedback on your teacher talk that will really make a difference. People tell, oh, you speak too much. Yeah, whatever. You speak too fast. Yeah, sure. You need to hear yourself.
Yeah.
See, just hearing myself there during the video, cringe, right? But it's helpful because I made notes. And I was thinking, okay, so this is how I said this. I should have said that in that way.
Yes.
I don't think you need to record a whole lesson and listen back, but recording a chunk, like a 10-minute chunk of a lesson, is useful. Listen back. And even maybe transcribe everything and ask yourself, what was necessary? What wasn't?
Yes. This is something I actually do when observing lessons. I like to just write down word for word how teachers use language in the classroom, because very often they can't believe that this is actually what they said, because it's very difficult to control your language. Yes.
Absolutely. Now, recording yourself, I'm not going to lie, it's not pleasant, right? It's certainly not pleasant, but I found that fewer things are more effective. Honestly, whenever I did my Celtic course, was teacher talking time, and you're like, yeah, but as soon as Celtic is over, who cares, right?
Empty concept, yes. TTT, but we don't really know what it is exactly. Yes.
But I think it's really just having to record myself. And this came from my first director of studies, who was bossy, but she was brilliant. And I knew that if she told me to record myself, I knew she had a good reason to tell me to do. So I did it. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes. Because you need to hear yourself. So I think if you're a native speaker, it's not a bad thing to just script your instructions, record a chunk of your lesson, maybe like, let's say the clarification stage of your lesson, your grammar presentation maybe, which is the stage where teachers tend to over explain.
Yes.
Maybe. But I think the key, if you're teaching beginners, is put yourself in your learner's shoes. If you can, at any stage, also be a beginner language learner yourself. So let's say if you're a native speaker and you're teaching in a country where you don't speak the language, learn it. Yeah. If you have access to language lessons, because you need to know what it's like to be a beginner in the room. There's, to really go, oh, right. So that's how much repetition, that's how much drilling you really need to do in a lesson. Yeah.
I guess you can also kind of adopt this philosophy of showing instead of telling. So better to show rather than tell, because that will limit the amount of words that will be used in the classroom, right?
Especially with instructions. So I just want to show you a couple of activities. But
Jenny is just reminding us we only have 5 minutes left, so yeah.
Yeah, one thing you were saying, Gabby, the idea of showing instead of telling. So let's say if you're giving your instructions, you know, I think the default is, you know, we hand out the worksheets and then we hope to get our students' attention when we tell them what to do, and it's too late because they're all too busy looking at their piece of paper. So again, if you show people, say, okay, now we've got uppercase letters here, and on the right, we've got lowercase letters. Your job is to match the uppercase with the lowercase, like this.
Yeah.
Okay, and that I think is referred to as chesting. That's the word. But again, visual communication goes a long way. So you may not need to say something if you can show it. What's the saying? A picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, I think that's...
Make it a million. It's worth 1,000,000 words. But that's one of the activities that we use, you know, when we teach very basic literacy skills. A couple of more things I'd like to show you. I know we don't have too much time, but as I said, don't shy away from using authentic materials, because also if you feel, oh, I've got phonics activities, but maybe they look a bit childish and I don't have time to adapt them. If you have a balance of different materials, your adult learners won't mind doing something that looks a bit childish if then they get to work with something that's more relevant to their daily life. So here I always have my street finder for Belfast, because that's alphabetical order, isn't it? So then we've got the worksheet for, say, you know, this is my address. This is where I live. What page? And again, you can show people where the questions are.
So much more relevant, right? So,
yeah. Oh, yeah. And then they have to go through that. People say, we don't need alphabetical order. You know, we've got phones and we can just use the dictionary. You don't need the alphabet. Oh, you do. You know, I know maybe people say, oh, that's old fashioned. Well, I stand by it. I still think you need to know the alphabet and the alphabetical order. So using street finders, really, really useful. I think if there's an event, maybe if we have events happening again, who knows? But you know, always use the culture night events, you know, and saying, okay, well, let's look. Because again, a lot of the text, you know, it's short, it's concise, it's organized in different sections. So we can look at the different sections. So often they're color-coded. And then you can say, okay, find one activity that your friend would like in the drama page. You know, so I think don't shy away from using authentic materials. We don't need to grade the materials, we need to grade the task. Right? So make sure the task is realistic and make sure that it's achievable.
Because really, Sophie, now when I think about it, I can't even think of a single literacy course book per se. Is there a course book as such?
No, there are books written for teachers with activities, right? But we don't have a course book. And I think the reason for that, Gabby, is that you can't, one scheme of work, one syllabus is not going to work for 2 literacy learners because their needs can be so different. So I was like, why can't I find, you know, a beginner literacy course? And I think it's because the needs are so varied that it's really hard to say, well, unit 1 will do that. Some people might need the alphabet right here, right now. Some people might just need to look at writing their name first. Some people might need to look at reading. People might need to look at writing first. So again, based on the student's needs.
Really, literacy students' needs vary even more than general English students' needs, say in a general English class, whatever level. It sounds like this is more a one-to-one teaching experience that would be more beneficial, right, for literacy students than a group course.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you know, it's something that we do as well, I think, with our general English classes, you know, the needs analysis. There's one thing actually, I know we don't have much time, but I think as well as the needs analysis, I always find it useful to talk about what they expect. What they expect from their course and what they believe is good teaching. So even that sentence completion, you know, a good student, ... A good teacher, ... Because again, we can't make any assumptions.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's always useful to find what do they need, what do they expect from this, and what do they believe is going to work. Because then if we start from a different place, we need to find some kind of common ground. I'm just aware of the time. I want to see if there's one more question. Is there one more question from Maria?
This has been answered already, so don't worry, don't worry.
Oh.
It's the question about using formal language. And
okay.
So now I'm thinking, because obviously it's time to finish. So I wonder if we could just wrap it up by saying that even if we don't teach literacy at the moment, there may be a time in your life as a teacher, you can finish this for me. So,
sentence completion. Do it. Do it. If I can be completely honest, I don't think I would still be in this line of work today, wasn't it for the fact that I was told, well, here's your new class. Go. And if you need resources, we'll help you. If you need training, see if anything is available. But for me, I think as a general English teacher, it was a challenge I needed, because you never know who you're going to teach and you never know what you're going to be doing the next day. And the sense of purpose is incredible. And they'll keep you on your toes.
Beautiful, because that's what we want from our students, right? I mean, teachers
absolutely
on their toes, but it works both ways.
Absolutely, but I think it leads to beautiful partnerships. Yes. It really does.
So this was really, really lovely, useful, and really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks to gallery teachers. Thanks to everybody today who attended. Thanks to people who shared ideas and who asked questions. Thanks a lot. So I'll say, feel free to get in touch if I can be of any help. But thank you so much.